and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This is our mini-episode where I will answer comments and questions from the previous episode. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and today we'll be continuing our discussion on the 2016 film Anthropoid. The film focuses on Operation Anthropoid, the Czech resistance plot to assassinate SS General Reinhard Heydrich, subordinate to only Hitler and Himmler, and planner and architect of the final solution. Anthropoid was directed by Sean Ellis and written by Ellis and Anthony Fruin. It stars Cillian Murphy as Jozef Gabčík and Jamie Dornan as Jan Kubiš. The film was released to mixed critical reviews, but has been praised for its attempt to accurately portray the events. Usually in these mini-episodes we include oral histories from those who witnessed or participated in the events we discussed in the main episode. This episode, however, is a bit different. As we stated in the main episode, this story is not an American story. And the collection here at the National World War II Museum, which houses over 5,000 video and audio oral histories, is strongly focused on the American experience for obvious reasons. And as a result, is somewhat devoid of foreign accounts and unfortunately does not contain stories from this heroic event. So what we decided we would do today is talk about the main characters in the movie, that being Reinhard Heydrich and the two assassins, Kubiš and Gabčík. As we mentioned in the main episode, Heydrich is not really talked about a whole heck of a lot except for the fact that he's the target. That does say that he's a general and that he is number 3 in the Third Reich, which to an extent he was number 3 in the SS. But as we talked about in the main episode, the target for the assassination attempt was, as I said, SS General Reinhard Heydrich. There wasn't a ton of information given in the film about Heydrich, which hardly any at all, frankly. And we talked a little bit about him in the main episode, but I thought I'd give a little more information on him and his deeds, such as they were here. Heydrich was appointed as chief of the SD, which is the Sicherheitsdienst, in 1931. The SD was the SS's internal security force. And by 1930, he was appointed directly by Himmler, by the way. He was friends with Himmler, I guess you could say. And Himmler liked him and thought he was very energetic and had good ideas, again, such as they were, and he appointed him as head of the SD. By 1933, the SD had become the largest and most effective internal German security force, which is saying a lot considering what the Third Reich was, which was a police state. In June 1934, Rudolf Hess, who was at that time deputy to Adolf Hitler, he was number 2, named the SD the sole agency authorized to gather political intelligence in the Third Reich. And again, I mean, think about that. This is a police state, and it's ruled by, with an iron fist by basically influencing people in whatever way possible to get these people to go along with your ideas and ideals. And if this man is being put up as the head of this internal security force, he's got to have some serious backing, and he's got to have some serious ideas. With his background in security establishment and police issues, Heydrich was the main person responsible for the establishment of the Gestapo, which is the Geheimstaatspolizei. The Gestapo, which was the German secret police, was infamous all over Europe, but especially inside the Reich. These were the people that you see in the movies. They're wearing the black leather trench coats and they got the fedoras on, and they're kind of hiding in the shadows and they're listening to conversations. Well, for all intents and purposes, that's pretty dang accurate. They were those people who were listening to conversations and trying to find the defeatists and the people who were bad-mouthing the Reich, and they would arrest them. They would interrogate them and try to find out what their actual loyalties were. And Heydrich was the guy that established the Gestapo. And as such, he was their commanding officer for a very long time. From their establishment, I want to say until about 1940, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But continuing his climb through the Nazi world, in 1939, Heydrich was appointed as the commander of the new Reich Security Main Office, or as the Germans called it, the RSHA. According to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I quote, "So potentially powerful was the new agency that Heydrich kept its formal existence a secret until his death in 1942. Correspondence going outside the RSHA bore the pre-1939 letterhead, the chief of the security police in the SD. This was the end-all, be-all of internal Reich security. I mean, this organization, the RSHA, had ultimate power in the Reich. They had ultimate power of arrest, of execution, of trial by jury, if you will. They could do pretty much whatever the hell they wanted to at any time within the Third Reich. And there's a lot of stories about the SS and the SD in particular, keeping dossiers on everybody within the Reich, including Göring and Hitler and all of them. Pretty much everybody had a dossier. They had been observed, or I don't want to say tailed because that's not the proper term, but they'd been looked into many times over. And the man who was in charge of all that was none other than Reinhard Heydrich. And he made it abundantly clear that he was the man when it came to all things internal security. And the RSHA's job was essentially to suppress any and all internal and external political opposition to the Third Reich. And I'll let the listener, determine what that means, but that means basically anybody who questioned the Reich was to be quashed, was to be thrown into jail, interrogated, questioned, maybe released, maybe not. They were also to examine and plan for the destruction of the Reich's main enemies. And this is not something I'm making up. This is something taken directly from books here. Those consisted of Marxists, political churches such as the Lutherans and the Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, right-wing nationalists, which is ironic because that's what the Third Reich was, or the Nazis rather were, Freemasons, and of course the Jews. In relation to what the Nazis called the Jewish question and Heydrich's role in the final solution to the Jewish question, he played a very, very, very high-level role in the original or the initial organized killings of the Jews of Europe. He was the organizer and the founder of the Einsatzgruppen, which is something a lot of people don't know. Reinhard Heydrich was the man who came up with the idea of the mobile killing squads. And the Einsatzgruppen, as I said, were mobile killing squads that roamed behind the front lines of Eastern Europe, of the Eastern Front. And this is Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, all those countries. And what they would do is they'd go into villages and towns, and they'd round up the Jews in these villages and towns, and they'd haul them off, usually off into the distant woods not too far from these villages, and kill them. And they would murder them by gunfire most of the time, actually all of the time. And I do have to be abundantly clear, and I think we talked about this in Schindler's List episode, is that not all of the killers were Germans. A lot of the times in some of these eastern countries like Latvia and Estonia, they were assisted by the local population who hated the Jews just as much, if not more so, than the Nazis did. So the Einsatzgruppen, and just to clarify a little bit on the Einsatzgruppen, were deployed on the Eastern Front. There were no Einsatzgruppen on the Western Front or in the Mediterranean or anything like that. And they were all over. It wasn't just like, one or two groups of people. It wasn't, half a dozen guys. They were pretty good-sized squads of people roaming around killing. And they were all over the Eastern Front. They had been broken up into like Einsatzgruppen A and B and C and D. And they were very, very effective at what they were trying to do. But the one thing that they were not too good at was efficiency. While they killed a lot of people, they weren't killing people fast enough, and at least in the Germans' eyes, the Nazis' eyes, rather. And in 1942, a meeting was called in a little suburb of Berlin called Wannsee, and it was called the Wannsee Conference. It was a conference held at a lavish villa, as I said, just outside of Berlin on January 20th, 1942. It was chaired by none other than Reinhard Heydrich, with the participation of 15 officials and representatives of the Reich authorities. At this meeting, the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA, coordinated the extermination plans for the Jewish population of the parts of Europe currently under German control, which you got to understand in 1942 consisted of everything from the English Channel to well inside the Soviet Union. I'm not talking at the borders. I'm talking several hundred miles inside the Soviet Union. And extend all the way up north to Norway and all the way south. I don't want to say to Italy yet because they weren't in Italy yet, but down south all the way into Greece even. So this is a massive area. And what the Wannsee Conference did was basically establish the legal, quote, unquote, process for exterminating European Jewry. Heydrich spoke about the inclusion of 11 million Jews in the Nazi program for the final solution to the Jewish question. Of course, we know that 6 million people were killed in the Holocaust, so the Germans fell short of their nasty little goal, but 11 million people were the target of the final solution, The purpose of the meeting was not to deliberate on the subject, but to inform and secure support from government ministries and other interested agencies relevant to the implementation of the final solution. So let me be clear. This decision had already been made, and Heydrich was fully aware of this. He'd already gotten the support of the Fuhrer, and he was informing all these people who are at this meeting, many of whom did not necessarily agree with this idea, that they were basically told, no, it's going to happen, and you're going to help, and don't even ask why, or don't even think about telling me no. As I said, there were apparently some serious questions among those in attendance as to whether the Fuhrer knew about the orders for extermination, and as such, the meeting was to also clarify to all in attendance that not only did Hitler himself know, he had tasked Heydrich and the RSHA with coordinating the operation, the entire operation, that is, the entire extermination of European Jewry. Upon hearing this news, the meeting went from conversation and brief deliberation during breaks to discussion on the implementation of a policy decision that had already been made at the highest level of the Nazi regime. So it went from saying, well, maybe this might not be the best idea among those who were taking breaks and going to the bathroom and drinking brandy, to, okay, what's the best way to get this done and what's the most efficient way to kill these people? The extermination and murder of Jews had begun before the Wannsee Conference, but because of the conference, the mass efficient extermination of so-called enemies of the Reich was now a state-mandated plan that began to be carried out at places such as Chelmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, and of course later Birkenau. Even as Heydrich planned the elements of what would become the killing aspect of the Holocaust, he sought other areas in which to secure future SS predominance in Nazi Germany. Both Hitler and Heydrich aimed to demonstrate to everyone around them that the SS could administer territory both within and outside the Reich more effectively than civilian bureaucrats or military officers who were currently in charge of the occupied territories. In occupied countries such as France and Czechoslovakia, most of those areas were under either local civilian control who were basically puppets of the Nazi government, or appointed Nazi officials from Germany, or German army, Wehrmacht, if you will, commanding officers and the like. But the SS, who were the elite of Nazi society, felt that they could do it better. And Heydrich and Hitler and Himmler basically laid a plan to prove that that was actually the case. Not that they really needed to prove anything. They could do whatever the hell they want to do anyway. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union, and we'll get to Czechoslovakia here now, following the invasion of the Soviet Union, communist resistance activities picked up in Czechoslovakia. And what you have to remember, too, is communism was the main enemy, aside from the European Jewry, of the Third Reich. And Hitler he abhorred communists. He abhorred everything about communism, which made the whole non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union even more astonishing when it actually was signed. But any kind of communist resistance was immediately to be quashed. And again, as I said, upon the invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, that communist resistance that had kind of been buried in Czechoslovakia started to spring up. Sabotage, random killings of occupying German soldiers occurred. And Czechoslovakia, as we mentioned in the main episode, was a very, very important part of the Reich to Germany because they had armaments factories there. They had other munition factories. The Skoda works were there. The artillery and different things, and aircraft engines were manufactured there. Oil. It was an important place for the Reich and important for their war ministry. And it was important for everything, really, in consideration to the whole plan. But the SS saw that any kind of disruption of production, any kind of disruption of material, be it war material or foodstuffs, was going to hurt the German war effort. And in so much, they decided to quash any kind of rebellion, any kind of resistance at all in Czechoslovakia. And in 1941, September 1941 to be exact, Adolf Hitler appointed Reinhard Heydrich as the protector of Bohemia and Moravia, which is, of course, part of Czechoslovakia. One of his first acts as essentially the ruler of Czechoslovakia, which is what he was, Heydrich was to plan and orchestrate a narrowly focused attack on real and perceived resistance leaders and fighters in Czechoslovakia. In October and November, just a month and a half after he took control, Heydrich's people had executed 342 Czechs, and turned over 1,200 people over to the Gestapo interrogation and control, air quotes on that one there. He enacted harsh policies against those who participated in or were suspected of resistance, not the least of which was, of course, death. The result of Heydrich's policies was a 73% reduction in acts of sabotage within 6 months. 73%. They say in the movie, the Czech resistance fighters say that essentially their resistance had been either all arrested or killed off at the time that the parachutists come in, the assassins come in, and it's very accurate according to the statistics. By the spring of 1942, the German authorities in Czechoslovakia could boast of a pacification of the protectorate. As a result, such was his confidence, Heydrich that is, that he had pacified the population. He rode around Prague flagrantly in an open-top convertible, as we see in the film. And we all know how that turned out for him. That brings me to our two Czech fighters, Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš. One fault I have with the film is that they really don't go into the background of the two men much at all. As a matter of fact, they show Jan Kubiš, who was the more experienced of the two in terms of combat, having shaking hands, as Christelle had pointed out. Unfortunately, there isn't a great deal known about Gabčík, with the exception of the fact that he fled Czechoslovakia in 1939, fought on the Western Front during the German invasion, and eventually made his way to Great Britain. Gabčík was apparently an exceptional soldier, as he was singled out within his unit to be trained as a paratrooper, and he was assigned to the British SOE. It was the SOE, by the way, who hatched and devised the plan to assassinate Heydrich in the first place. And it was here, when he was training with the SOE, that he met and trained with Jan Kubiš. A bit more is known about Kubiš, who, like Gabčík, was a combat veteran who had fought in Poland Kubiš had fought in Poland in 1939. And I should note that Kubiš was a career soldier. It's not known if Gabčík was, but no records prove that he was, so we're going to assume that he was not. But Kubiš was. He enlisted in the Czech Army in 1937, and he was an infantryman. And he rose to the rank of a platoon sergeant by 1938 when he was discharged from the Army after the Munich Agreement. The Munich Agreement basically disbanded the Czech military, so Kubiš was discharged from the Czech Army. He escaped Czechoslovakia in 1939 and went to Poland, where he joined a Czech unit in Poland and fought the Germans in Poland in 1939. He escaped Poland after its capitulation and, oddly enough, made his way to Algiers, where he enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. And he and his unit were sent to the Western Front, where he again fought the Germans, and he earned the French Croix de Guerre, which is a very, very high award for gallantry. Following France's fall, he escaped to Great Britain, where he, like Gabčík, was pulled into the British SOE and trained as a paratrooper. So, I mean, unlike the movie where they show Kubiš to be the more reluctant of the two, it was probably quite the opposite, actually. Kubiš had more experience in combat than did Gabčík, and he more than likely would have been the steadier hand, no pun intended. Following their prolonged battle with the SS in the cathedral in downtown Prague, the bodies of Gabčík and Kubiš were buried in a mass grave at the Deblici Cemetery in Prague by the Germans. Ironically enough, later on in 1947, after their traitor, Karel Kurda, was executed by the Czechs for being a traitor, he was buried in the same mass grave. In 1990, the mass graves were excavated, and a memorial was placed on the spot where they had been buried. There have been recent efforts to identify Kubiš and Gabčík's remains through forensics and give them a proper grave and hero's funeral, but as of today, as of 2018, that effort has not gained any ground. So that being said, thanks so much for listening. Tune in next week where we discuss the 1949 classic, Battleground. If you would like to explore the oral history collection I talked about earlier, please visit our digital collections at www.2online.org. That's www.2online.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.